3, 2, 1, and we should be live. Mr. McWomble, welcome back. You want to kick it off with the intro?
Thank you. I'm back, and I'm here to wreck shit. or not. I could just be nice. You never know. I could have been on my my holidays down by the seaside visiting family, or I could have been in a behavioural adjustment centre somewhere in the middle of Japan. So that anyone other than me, when they say the word Yakuza, I have to say it's a magical series of games. Yes, welcome. We are the Beerumverate. We are a group of guys who like good beer and video games and talking about them on the internet. We are not here to promote drinking. Please drink responsibly. Any beers or breweries who we may talk about aren't sponsoring us. But if you want to, is it Tenaya Creek, who Matt seems to plug every single time he comes on.
So funny you should mention that, because I didn't buy any Tenaya Creek this week.
Are you feeling okay?
Yeah, they just had a special on different local beer.
Okay, then that's fine. And then Tenaya Creek, you missed out. That was your one opportunity.
Or 7.
We're going. I wasn't around last week. I was away, and in my absence, these two pimped themselves out to an inferior podcast to talk about bad video games. I mean, why would anyone want to talk about bad video games?
They're not just bad, but we love them. You're missing a big portion of the half, sir.
Yeah. So, Matt, we've heard from you. Mitch, how are you? How's things?
I'm good. It's crazy weather here. Gonna go to a baseball game later, and I'm not drinking now because I'm gonna be drinking then. So,
Matt, how's things? How is your romance with a technomancer?
It's pretty good. Actually, I was looking to see if I could pick that up on Steam, so that I might be able to play that. I got to finish other games first, but
Technomancer or Techno Dancer?
Techno Dancer.
Techno Dancer.
Matt's previous career was as a techno dancer. You heard it here first. Dude, since neither of you guys are drinking, shall we skip beers and go straight into rumours?
I have the remnants of last night. I can tell you about those beers.
Yeah, because that sounds really thrilling.
What did you talk about during your stream last night?
I did, yeah. So I had Las Vegas Lager from Big Dogs, and then I love Nevada Amber Lager. So these are the dead soldiers from last night. And if you're curious about the descriptions, yeah, you can watch my videos from last night.
All right, and real men marry technomancers. That's what it says on Matt's T-shirt, apparently. So rumours now, because we've had multiple appearances of the Sifted.net high-profile lurker of the Hoff. The other high-profile lurker wanted to get in on the action, and it's none other than
yeah, you never get good cuts of images, sir. You need to work on that.
Well, you can tell who it is, though. It is the Brahmable Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He didn't want to be left out from the high-profile lurkerness of fellow Mitches, so he's there. He's behind the scenes.
Do you purposely seek out Baywatch images on the internet? Is that
what you do in your spare time? I like long walks on the beach. More like I like surfing on the internet for Baywatch images.
Are there other images on the internet?
Maybe not.
Plenty.
Maybe I'm missing out.
Right. So we're here to talk about retrofuturism. Now, Matt, you spawned this topic from the dark annals of your brain. So you take it away in terms of explaining what it is you want to go for.
All right, so retrofuturism, the idea behind this topic was to talk about what we think the future of retro games is going to be. basically, like, we've got collections of games that you can get on any different system. We've got the mini consoles that are coming out. There's obviously, you can collect the old systems themselves, although they're deteriorating over time. So I was just curious what your guys' thoughts were on sort of what the future of retro games will be, and then we can also touch on sort of what retro games are in definition, because I know that Mitch doesn't necessarily agree with the Jeremy Parrish, Bob Mackey definition. I don't particularly agree with their definition, though it does seem to make sense.
Probably let's start with that first. Why don't you give that definition? Because then that helps support the rest of the conversation in regards to the future if we define what it is now.
Okay, so on the Retronauts podcast, Jeremy Parrish and Bob Mackey came up with the idea. There might have been other people involved too, but those are the two names that I remember. That basically any game that is 10 years old or older is a retro game. But if you think about that now, that's stuff that came out in 2009. So technically, under their definition, anything that came out January or July 19th, 2009 or before would technically be retro today.
That's a bit prescriptive.
Yeah, I don't know where the hard stop at 10 years came from. I'd have to go back.
Because they made it up. Let's make up a totally arbitrary definition of what retro is. Yeah.
So, Mitch, what?
Yeah, Mitch, you might have a slightly more erudite rebuttal to that definition rather than mine.
Yeah, I think it's actually all of us together, and this is why I wanted McWomble to be on this conversation when we were thinking about doing this last week, and I was like, no, McWomble's, you got all your perspectives are going to be great for this one because we. Yeah. Of our ages, not saying I'm a younger.
Be careful.
So it's just, I think the age part comes into the play here, which I think, when you think about retro. So I went to Merriam-Webster. I went to the old lady of Miss Merriam-Webster to get some feedback in regards to what retro means. So it doesn't really help. The definition is pretty crummy anyways, but literally just says backwards or back is the best definition on there. They also said stuff in like relating to reviving old styles, especially fashions of the past. So it does kind of match what they're saying, but I guess when I think of retro, I think of like the 80s or like the very beginning age of that thing that started. So like an example, like when I think of retro, I think of like Space Invaders, Pac-Man, like early game stuff like in the arcades is what I think of when I think of retro. And so to think of retro as 10 years in the past, it will soon become where I think retro would be oversaturated, where it wouldn't make sense to the point where I'm like, okay, what's really retro then? Like it's going to be, instead of this small group of games where there may be 100 games that are retro, it's now thousands and thousands of games that are now considered retro. And I think that they should be split up into different categories then. But I don't know. I see as retro as the beginning of that age. Then me, when I played the PlayStation 1 as a kid, I don't consider that retro because there's something before that, I guess.
Okay.
I get where you're coming from, and I think retro is going to be a matter of perspective for each individual. So putting a arbitrary definition of, it's got to be anything older than 10 years is retro is just fucking stupid. So these people obviously have a successful podcast, and we come on here and chat shit for roughly an hour. So yeah, they're going to probably have a wider reach than we would. But yeah, it's daft. The whole idea about retro games is that you take your own view about what you view as that. So taking an arbitrary definition as, would I view Mass Effect 1 as being a retro game? No, of course it's not. Would I view Baldur's Gate as being a retro game? No.
Okay.
And this is where you get into kind of what's genres and types of games that can be classed as retro. So you're ending up with kind of splitting hairs in multiple different ways, and so I'd rather not spend too much time talking about a definition of what retro means for each of us, but more focus on what the potential is for retroism going forward, because there's some actually really interesting stuff coming out, hence the backdrop. I'm picking this up. I bought the Capcom beat 'em up collection,
Right.
which Evan, you need to buy that goddamn game, because that has PP all over it. And I am one trophy away from getting a platinum, and all I need to do is complete that game with someone online. And it's a really easy platinum. So someone buy that game on PlayStation, and you can get an easy platinum, and you play some great side-scrolling beat-em-ups. So for me, retro is the games that I was playing when I was younger, like Mitch was guessing at.
Right.
And then an appreciation.
But not necessarily the games that I was playing when I was a kid. It's more that time period when you were a kid, but not my time period when I was a kid. Actually, what year was that?
How dare you? You never ask a Scotsman their age.
I didn't ask for your age. I said give me a year.
Then you'd be able to guess. Yes, I am the oldest person on this.
Not by much.
Umverate. So the interesting thing for me is not only having that kind of timestamp of when you started playing games, whether that be in the arcade or whatever first console you got, or whatever, but an appreciation of what came before. So what came up to that point to create the thing that you started playing. So you're not coming at it from this kind of myopic sense of this is the only game that can be classified as something. And then you've got the people who have taken those ideas and brought them forward. So you've got Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Now you can't buy that anymore because of rights.
Well, stuff like Owlboy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was going through. I'm on a hardcore side scroll beat 'em up.
Oh, all right, okay.
Vibe. So if you take that, it's got a retro style in both its aesthetics and the gameplay. But does that make it a retro game?
I would say no.
No.
Yeah.
Just because it mimics the style doesn't make it that it didn't come out then. It wasn't a forefronter of that genre.
So this is where you get into remakes of actual retro games.
Which I feel bad. What game is that behind you?
That's Ninja Warrior. Have you not seen the trailer for this? This game looks awesome.
No, I have not.
And it was amazing. It was amazing. Go and watch the trailer.
Tweet it at me and I'll take a look at it.
Yeah. So sifted.net search engine Ninja Warrior.
Yeah.
Ninja Warrior once again. So it's a remake of the SNES game, side-scrolling beat 'em up as cybernetically enhanced Ninja Warriors. Freaking awesome.
I think you bring up a really interesting point though in regards to like this in general, is that you feel like that, and you can correct me if I misheard, is that like retro is kind of the generation you grew up with when you were a kid, which was kind of the arcade style when that was big, where when I grew up, arcades really weren't a thing very much anymore. They're more of a rarity nowadays, especially when I grew up. I was on a PlayStation 1 era growing up. Really, really little was when the PlayStation, more like PlayStation 2 is when I started to actually get involved in games, like as an individual, instead of having like my dad having it and me playing it. And so I feel that that time period that you're talking about as retro to you is retro to me, and I find that super interesting.
But that's because you've got that appreciation of, like I was saying, of what came before.
Exactly.
So there were the things that you were playing, but what came before to do that. And now if you kind of extrapolate that forward, so the other way, I'll get my left and right going. So if you extrapolate that forward, what kids are playing now, at what point does that then become retro? So when do we get the re-releases of the games from the last 5 years?
I think that's kind of where the 10-year definition comes from, though. You know, because like what kids are playing now, if they're in the end of elementary school, in 6 to 8 years, they're going to be in college, right?
But is the market? Sorry to kind of butt in, but I'm back and I'm going to use my time, and yours and Mitch's. Who is retro aimed at now? I don't think it's aimed at kids. I think it's aimed at that middle demographic of the majority of gamers, which is, was it 30 to 36-year-olds?
Well, I think it's aimed specifically at the adults showing their kids what they played with when they were a kid. So then they can relate to it and go, oh, this is what you played when you were younger. And they might find nuances within that going, oh, because of this game, that's why I experienced this in this game nowadays.
Yeah. Do you remember couch co-op? You don't have to play against people online.
My best friend has a Switch, and one of the biggest reasons why he has one is because Nintendo is still the only one that does couch co-op, and we still loved couch co-op constantly. We always find a reason to find something with couch co-op.
Yeah, there's few games that do that these days. I wish there was. Well, I think it's coming back though. It
is coming back a lot more. Yeah, especially with the Switch.
Yeah, like with Marvel Ultimate Alliance. You know, that's coming out.
Picked that up yesterday. I haven't actually switched it on yet. But I've got it.
Switched it on.
Nice. So how do you think, so we sort of gone over a little bit about like what our definition of retro is and all of that. How do you think retro is going to be consumed going forward? You guys have
orally. You take its tablets.
Daily, right?
And then memories will start popping in your brain of memories you never had of retro games going, oh, I did that.
You take these small capsules of nanobots, and then they start just beaming retro images directly into your brain.
But so like the arcade 1-up machines, have you guys seen those?
Yeah.
They're like $300. They're I think they're 3/4 size, so they're not a full arcade machine. Yeah, they're very
cool looking. Stupidly expensive.
Well, $300 is not too bad for a system that plays 5 or 6 different arcade games. And
that's actually not bad to think about it. It's almost basically you're just buying a console, but it's just a retro console.
Yeah.
Goes to show you two obviously have quite a lot more money than me.
Oh, you're funny. No, I do not have more money than you.
If I could,
to me, $300 is not cheap.
Well, no, it's not. But
it's not. But if you think in perspective of a console, it's relatively same price.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I could convince my wife to let me get one, I might spend the money on it. But so there's those. The mini.
You need to start cutting some hair then on the side. You have your day job and then cut some hair at the weekends.
The mini consoles. Do you guys own any of those?
No.
No.
Okay, I don't.
My friend has a SNE, the NES.
I was this close to buying the SNES Classic, and then just thought, 75 quid. Nah.
I almost bought the PlayStation Classic just because it was only $20 at Best Buy recently, but Really, it's just an emulator machine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Like
have most of those
all
games
these
that go.
devices are basically just emulators, and I can already do that on my PC. Um, how do you guys feel about emulation and ROMs? Because I feel like there wouldn't exist a market for like retro games today if the pirates in the late '90s hadn't started backing up, NES games to a digital format.
I think it's theft, and I think it's ruining the games industry, along with the resale of secondhand games. And it's because of that we now have microtransactions and loot boxes.
Well,
So well done, Matt, for perpetuating glorified gambling mechanics.
all right. What about sites like GOG that are just packaging up basically? I mean, what was DOS abandonware in the early 2000s?
Did either of you watch the video that they did about GOG rescuing? They're called rescuing old games. Really
No.
interesting.
I've not seen that.
I think it's still curated on Sifted, so if you can go and kind of pull that out, good for them. And that's where I've picked up games like Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2.
Right.
Now, would I class that as a retro game? I'm not sure. Would someone else who was maybe slightly younger and not as familiar with Star Wars canon prior to Disney, but also the game play is quite dated now. I was playing that the other day and was like, wow, I remember this being better. So I think there's something about retro having a certain level of gameplay quality that was available at the time that now things we could potentially take for granted. But then there's also the kind of retro style games that have been given a significantly modern twist, but that just maybe stylistically rather than in terms of tweaking gameplay. I'm trying to think of the name of the boss rush game where you play a ninja.
Fury?
Yeah. So that's got quite a retro aesthetic to it. And whilst boss rush games weren't around when the style that's taken was actually being used, but some of the I'm trying to think of a better word than bastard hard mechanics were, but that's because going back to at those times you had to make games really hard because you wanted people pumping quarters into an arcade machine,
Right.
or you had to make it really hard because no one wanted to play a game for 2 hours and then take it back into a video game store and trade it in for something else.
Right.
I honestly, I think I like that they're trying to bring the old consoles back in an aspect of doing like the miniature emulators and those aspects. Do I think ROM saved like retro games? No, I don't really think I don't think they did, but I don't think they hurt the industry at all in that aspect. I think really what they'll continue to do, and I think will work, is release packages where I remember in even the PlayStation 2 era, they would come out with like a one disc with like 10 retro games on it. So you would get like your Pac-Man, you would get your Space Invaders, you would get all those games all packed in with a disc that you bought for like $40. So then it's cheaper, more enticing. You purchase it, and then you get to experience and enjoy it. You both rubbed your noses at the same time. That's hilarious. But
we went thumbing our noses at you.
But I think they even do it nowadays too. Like they still come out with like discs of like bundles of games from that area and that genre. And these mini consoles also, they've been releasing them for forever. Like I remember when I was a kid, oh gosh, it was probably when I had a Game Boy Advance, that kind of just time period wise. I don't remember what year that was specific. But I remember that they still had the, like, you got this box. My mom bought it. It was a box that had a joystick on it, and it came preloaded with a bunch of games on it, including Pac-Man. And all you do is plug it into your TV, you turn it on, you just play it. And so
oh god, do you remember when games used to work? Oh, what a happy time that was.
You just plug and play it, and then you didn't have to load anything, you just went. But I just think they'll continue on that path, and I think as long as people still enjoy those games, and the people that love them will share them with their loved ones, and if those people enjoy them just like their parents did, I think that this will not go away. I think it'll just get really confusing as we move on into the future of what people consider retro, because people consider arcade style as retro. Even in your words, you said, McWomble, you were talking about, I forgot what game you were talking about, top of my head, the title, but you were talking about a game and you're like, oh, it had a retro style. And I was like, automatically, you already know what that means. It's arcadey, 80s type of game.
16-bit.
Yeah, 16-bit, like something like Towerfall has a retro style because it's that 16-bit. So I just I think regardless, it's just it'll be interesting to see how the conversation moves forward, if people will still consider 80s 16-bit games still retro, or is that going to change in a definition entirely, that retro will move a further generation ahead, and then what we considered as retro currently will be named something else.
It only depends on what the property holders want to do with it, because what may be considered retro in, say, a further 10 years time, maybe we would have to wait 20 years for a HD remake of Mass Effect, because that's far enough in the future for EA to warrant spending probably not too much money, if they haven't been slapped with warning labels all over FIFA and Madden.
Do you mean remake or remaster?
Well, I think it would have to be a remake for it to warrant waiting that fucking long.
Well, because if I was going to say if it was going to happen, I probably would think it's at least 30 years at least before they decide to remake.
Well, how many versions of Final Fantasy VII have we fucking had?
Yeah, I mean, that game's only 22 years old.
What game?
We've had about Final Fantasy VII. How many versions of that we had? About 20.
But isn't that one game that kind of stood out as one of the most predominant games for a very significant long time, where Mass Effect, it's a really good game. I know Berkough's gonna hate me. It's a really good game, and we talked about it. I liked the game, but I think in the pool of games at the time that Mass Effect came out, is it that one, like Final Fantasy VII, that stands out, that you're like, oh, we do need a remake so much sooner because it's that amazing?
Well, one, Final Fantasy VII isn't that amazing, and
to you, it's not.
Yeah. In the perpetual sea of shite that was coming out on the PlayStation at that time, having one standout game that seems to have captured the imagination of far too many people and affected Matt on a subconscious level, so that he has to buy every remake whenever it comes out. I think there's not going to be the same ability for companies to start saying, oh, our game's retro now, so we need to re-release it.
Okay.
I think games have moved, game design and game making has moved on in a certain way that it's becoming more and more difficult for people, or will become exceedingly difficult for people to start remaking things and republishing them, Could you imagine in, say, I don't know, 40 years' time, we're going to get a special edition remaster of Cyberpunk 2077? I can't see it happening.
I guess I imagine
Maybe.
games doing what currently retro games are doing, which is just keep re-releasing it, updating it as a remaster, because they did that with Mass Effect, didn't they? They came out with
Nope.
PS3. They made Mass Effect 1 for the PS3, but like they still did like Beyond Good and Evil 2. That got remastered and re-released. Shadow of the Colossus, that ended up getting remake, but that also got remastered into another generation of console hardware. I think they'll just keep doing that and then remake something if it really means they want to they just feel like they want to remake it.
But does that make it retro? Or does
No.
that just mean we've got a lucrative IP that we want to milk?
That is a good question, because like I have the Atari collection on Steam.
I thought you were going to say multiple copies of Final Fantasy VII.
No,
It's got a whole cupboard full. If we opened up that cupboard behind you, it'd just be filled with copies of Final Fantasy VII.
Copies are
just
falling
spill
out
out.
of the shelves. They all fall.
No, but all right, so the Atari Vault, that has a collection of 100 some odd
Awful
games.
games.
No, some of them are not that bad. Some of them are pretty bad, but they're not really remastered in any way. There's some interesting like display options for the vector graphics games, because the vector monitors had a very different visual style to them because of the way that it drew the graphics on the screen. But they're not really remastered or remade in any way. So it's interesting to think like maybe the future of retro will be you have to improve it in order to re-release it.
I probably would think that, or at least touch it up to fit with the current hardware that is out.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to be like a prerequisite moving forward, or if there's
I'm
a
just
way.
curious to think of like what's like those retro games that we consider retro right now will look like in 40 years when they try to touch it up to make it look just as good
On an 8K display, even though our eyes can't see in 8K.
Yeah.
Like it'll be really interesting to see if going, wow, that is a huge jump, seeing the retro to the current generation of hardware.
Yeah, and is retro defined by time, or is retro defined by the hardware that was available at that time?
You mean the console generation?
Yeah. So if you take, when people talk about the 16 and 32-bit eras, and then the jump to 64, I'm trying to think, is anything that I played on the N64, would I class that as retro? I don't know, but I also don't think that is me just saying that in terms of there hasn't been enough time that's passed for me to do that, because there has been enough time passed, because it's more than 10 years according to the arbitrary definition that other people on a more popular gaming show talk about. But so would I say that, pick something out, Mario 64, is that retro?
No.
I would say so, yeah.
The
low poly aspect to it, the control scheme, right? You've got the single analog stick. I think all of those elements sort of contribute to it being quote unquote retro.
But if you're defining it by console generation, then you would consider the PlayStation 1 as well as the N64 came out, what the PS1 came out, I believe, same time period wise. So
Yeah.
Would you consider PlayStation games retro?
Yeah, I would say so.
I don't know. This is the thing. Some of the potential mechanics, and I would consider retro, so only using a D-pad. For now, when we're using kind of dual analog sticks for pretty much everything,
Right.
Yeah, I think we probably would consider that a retro game mechanic.
But I guess I would push back a little bit with your argument of the one stick, that the PlayStation 1 did have two sticks later on in its time period. For Ape Escape, it needed dual analog sticks
the
to be able
first
to play that
DualShock
game.
controller. Yeah.
Because I remember that, because my dad we had the original, and then he bought I don't know if they called it the mini, or we had a miniature version of it, and it came with the first DualShock, and it was interesting.
It was the PS1 ONE.
That's right. That's what it was. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I was like, it was something funky.
Yeah.
But that had two analog sticks, so I don't know if that fits in your. You might have to rephrase what you were just saying.
If I'm honest, I don't really care, because I think it's totally subjective.
Oh no, absolutely. I absolutely agree. It's all subjective. I just disagree with you all.
Yeah. Well, I'm indifferent towards anyone else's definition. I'm not arguing the toss about anything. I'm just asking the question that is it something about, rather than it just being an arbitrary, this is the console generation that it came from, is that these are the limitations that people had to work with at that time that makes something feel. And because retro isn't arbitrary, it is a feeling. It is something. It is a title that we put on something.
Right. Well, that's another aspect of it too, because there are these things called fantasy consoles, where
that's the PS5, isn't it?
No.
And the Xbox One, 2.
No.
The Xbox One, 2, 1, 2.
Basically, it's a set of specifications.
Fantasy consoles, holodeck, Star Trek. There you go. There's a mention. Screw you, Evan.
No, but you basically take like the same type of limitations that an NES or a Commodore 64 would have, and then you program that in using modern computers so that what comes out of that, or what can actually be played within that definition, is those types of games. So you only have so much memory available. You only have so many colors that you can deal with. You can only do so many sprites on screen. There's a couple of projects. One is called the TIC 80 or the TIC 80, which is I guess a play on the Tandy computer system, and then the other one is the Pico 8, which both of them are sort of similar to old style, like Commodore 64 type computers, or like early IBM machines that had BASIC with it. But it's all software defined. It's not actually hardware, but you're imposing those limitations on yourself to create games that are in the same spirit as what early designers had to deal with.
I find that's really interesting and really cool. I just wouldn't consider it as a retro. In the end, when they release it, I wouldn't consider it a retro game, just because I guess in my personal definition, I consider it a time period. I consider it the 32-bit and the 16-bit time period of, because there was just so many things in that generation that happened in regards to, it was limited to like one dimension. It was a one-dimensional type game that you were playing, and it wasn't, when you moved on to the next generation, which was PlayStation 1, the 64, it was a three-dimensional space. And I think the reason why I don't consider those fantasy consoles,
fantasy consoles, yeah.
The reason why I wouldn't consider them as necessarily retro, even though they're going with all the limitations of what that those game consoles had, is they have a new mindset of games that people did not have at that time. And so they might approach something differently or a level differently because of what they've experienced post that type of generation. And so, yes, are you going to get cool new experiences that you probably would have never experienced when you were a kid? Yeah, because you have a new perspective of how the medium works and like what they can do with it.
Right.
And so I just don't really, it'll be cool to play. Don't get me wrong. I'd be excited to try it out, but I just wouldn't consider it retro just because they're limiting themselves on that limitation because they know more than what they did at that time period.
Okay.
But what do you think, McWomble?
I just had a thought slightly along a different tack, but it kind of, when you were talking, the idea popped into my head. What about kind of the learning that people have taken? Because it's something that I don't know. I just had this thought of dungeon crawlers.
Right.
So it's obviously not a modern concept, but it has been modernized over the years. So you've got the classic kind of RPG dungeon crawlers, which now are god awful.
Most of them are hard to play.
Yeah, and they can be really, really punishing just because the programming capacity that they had at the time allows them to not be as forgiving as they potentially could be. But then they evolved into things like Diablo.
Okay.
So at what point, because I've been playing a bit of Diablo Eternal on Switch, would you say that style of gameplay becoming retro? Is it so it's less about a time period and potentially about a style of gameplay?
Okay, so it's similar to defining certain limitations you're talking about, like, well, because this genre is so well defined and it started so many years back, would that style of game or genre technically be retro? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or even the modernized version of that. So if we move forward with dungeon crawlers and they become actually VR experiences rather than gameplay, would the original Diablo then be classed as retro?
Yeah,
I can see.
I think.
Can you see where I'm going with the?
I do. Yeah, I think you have to bring in the VR argument and like how we interact with games. Is there going to be a point?
Oh my God! You use a controller to play your games?
Right. Yeah. Is there going to be a point where that does become like how we interact with it defines what is sort of retro?
Oh my God! It's not online. What do you mean you can't buy skins?
The even like the touchscreen, mechanics. Like my nephews are able to play Fortnite on their phones, and that fucking baffles me. Like how are you able to build and everything not having any tactile sensation?
It's a learning curve. I will admit it. I've tried it. I've tried to play some like console type style games using like a pretend stick as the touch screen. It is really, once you get the hang of it, it's no different. But it is quite a jarring experience at first, especially since we've all experienced tactile controllers in our hands with buttons that really click when you press them.
That's
like haptic feedback.
I can't wait to hear people complain going, I miss the good old days when we used to press a button and we get a nice click on it and it sounded so great.
I mean, yeah. That's why I have a mechanical keyboard. Like,
yeah. or when you press the forward on the analog stick, the person starts walking slowly, and if you pressed it all the way forward, they ran. Oh my God.
Right.
Or even go even further back and going, I remember back in my time when you'd press the forward button and they only walk and you have to press a button to make them run.
Yeah, looking at you, Rockstar.
Right.
I have to tap it over and over again. What the fuck? So there we go. There's another one. The original GTAs, so the top-down
yeah,
ones, definitely retro. GTA, Grand Theft Auto, retro for the PS2.
Oh, like
three?
Yeah, three.
Vice City and San Andreas.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I'll go. I'll say yeah.
Uh, I only say that because I've defined it as a time period, so it doesn't fit.
And yeah, this is where I'm kind of arguing with myself and my internal monologues going, because I'd potentially say, yeah, GTA 3 could be retro, because you think of what that did, the fact that the protagonist didn't speak,
Right.
and then you also think about what that did in terms of pushing open world games forward.
And how far they've come since then. Yeah.
Did the protagonist not speak in 3? I thought they did.
No.
Yeah, no, he never says.
It was
never
Vice
says a word.
City when they had a talking protagonist.
But other people spoke.
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah,
So
you had this mute protagonist who in the trailer was played by a British actor.
Well, if you're gonna say that, then you could say the South Park games are retro. Because the character never speaks. It's almost a 2D side.
Yeah, well, could you say that they've been influenced by retro RPGs? Yes. Would I class them in of themselves as retro games? Probably not. But they've definitely been heavily influenced by turn-based RPGs.
For Grand Theft Auto 3? Because what does it technically do different that makes it retro, that it's the first to do that? Because like you said, it's not the first time we've had a protagonist that doesn't speak.
No, I'm sorry, you're kind of fixating on the fact that he's not speaking rather than the fact that it was quite possibly the first open world game that really, in the same way that we were talking earlier on about Final Fantasy VII,
Right.
That was the first real open world game that blew the doors off the market. So whilst that has been re-released a couple of times on various different things, including iOS and Android,
Right.
Would that hit the same? Would that hit the same buttons, or
I see what you mean. Okay.
as something like the Final Fantasy VII, that we was talking about earlier?
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I think there's a lot of other games too that, like, I don't know. I think Square took advantage of re-releasing Final Fantasy VII, but
So many times.
yeah, but if only.
Are you admitting something there? Square Enix took advantage of you personally by
used their
releasing
power.
Final Fantasy VII.
It's just turned into a therapy session right now.
Yeah.
No, but like Metal Gear Solid, that game was amazing. I would consider that retro.
Which one?
Metal Gear Solid, the first one.
But there's multiple first ones depending on who you talk to.
Metal Gear's the original.
Yeah.
There's a difference. Metal Gear Solid is the first one for
PlayStation.
PS1.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would say that it isn't, because it just copies Metal Gear in a 3D environment. It's the only difference. It's basically doing the exact same thing.
Right.
So what is it doing differently besides being on a more powerful console that allows for 3D, but it doesn't take advantage and do something extremely different with it, does it?
Mitch makes a very good point, and I would pictorially like to move this on in terms of learning from the past. So talking about do we need to necessarily do things differently to make something retro? So we've got figuring out my left and right again. Name the game first of all.
I have no idea.
Oh,
Is it Commander Keen?
no.
No, it's Blazing Chrome,
Oh, never
Okay.
heard of it.
which people have called a spiritual successor to Contra.
Yeah.
Okay.
So obviously Contra, everyone would say, yeah, Contra's retro. So does something actually, so you can have something that is modern but also retro? Ooh.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think you can definitely. There's a ton of these games on Steam.
Yeah.
That sort of copy old games and put little twists here and there or slight modern conveniences into the mechanics of the gameplay, or whatever the case may be.
I think
So-
it can have a retro style, but I couldn't, and obviously I've said it a billion times, my definition, it doesn't fit in my definition of retro. So
Yeah.
technically I could definitely say like Metal Gear Solid has is inspired by the retro style that came before it, or another game can take and have that retro either look, gameplay mechanic, whatever it is, but it isn't retro, which is not
So this
necessarily a bad thing.
No, so this definitely is, because it's a 16-bit side-scrolling shoot-'em-up platformer.
Did it come out in the 80s?
No, it's coming out this year.
No, it doesn't count as retro for me then. It has to be in that time period of the 80s in the arcades. What was there before? This is inspired by that, by the retro games that came before it. So it's a retro style and retro inspired, but is not retro.
Okay. So Mitch has a very clear definition of.
It's an exclusive club, man. They gotta be in. They're not in the club. They're like on the side. They're on the dance floor wanting to get in the club, but there's a bouncer in front. His name is Mitch, and he says, "Get the hell out," because you ain't retro.
He's got a list. If your name's not down, you're not coming.
Yeah, your name's. Excuse me, you're not on the list.
Yeah. Mitch has obviously got a very separate section of games in his library.
Right.
Maybe behind a lock. It kind of walks in a special code.
But the tricky part I've been thinking about while we've been having this conversation is, I define what retro is for me, but I can't define, like, I have no idea what I would define the PlayStation 1 era with the like the 3D. Maybe I could define as the 3D era, but like the rest of it, I don't have a definition for like what I would call it. I know what it is. I know it's all grouped together, but I just don't know what I would call it.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that one, because maybe I'm just old, but I do think that there's a demarcation in time where the programming capacity and gameplay mechanics reached the point where they stopped potentially being as limiting.
Oh yeah, no, to piggyback off it, to maybe help with it, is that I think as we're getting further into these generations, I think it's easy to depict what like a difference between the PlayStation 1 era and the retro era. There's a big distinction there. There's maybe a little bit of a bigger distinction between the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era. But after that, it is hard to really define what is the significant difference, except for graphically, what makes it unique and different for that time period of games. So that's why when they talked about the 3D audio for the potentially for the PlayStation 5, that's like, oh, that's a defining thing for that generation that will change fundamentally how we view this group of games.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there wasn't a whole there wasn't a whole big difference between PS3 and PS4 in terms of like between the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3, it was like, wow, this is the clarity and just the visual fidelity is so much better in HD.
The bigness of the world, like how big you can make environments.
Yeah, like God of War 3 was like one of the first games I saw that was like when you're scaling the monsters, and it's like, holy shit, that's that was not something you could do before. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what the demarcation line would be in terms of hardware, but maybe HD. Like maybe when we entered the HD era, that's when you stop seeing limitations on hardware, or as much limitation on hardware.
Yeah, the crazy part is, what do we consider? I mean, maybe you could even say the PlayStation 3 era is the high definition era, because now we have 4K, or I guess what you can, it's hard because high definition is now just used as a casual phrase for anything higher than what the 720, or I would say even less than that. I thought 720p was high definition.
Yeah, it is.
Well,
So anything
below 720.
Oh, sorry,
up.
720 up. Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. I get what you mean. Maybe that's the distinction in regards to the PlayStation. I'm only going by PlayStations because that's what I grew up on, so that's kind of how I see the generations. But all the other consoles tied to it, or games, maybe it is then you go into the PlayStation 2, which is kind of I don't know. I can't think of how to. Maybe it's all combined in one, and then there's subsets now of stuff because high definition is such a casual word now. It's not like it's this to this. Or maybe we have the 4K era coming up soon. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and then when we move to actual proper VR integration, everything that came before it, everything was, yeah, like the Japanese emperors will end up with, as opposed to the Heisei era, we'll end up with the headset era.
I mean, saying that now, actually, it does make sense thinking about it, because we did talk about, we had the 32-bit era, we had the 64-bit, that's all visual. And then we had the HD, we're talking about the HD era. Maybe you do define it based off visual fidelity, but obviously we know there's more to it than just that, but maybe that's just the thing of how we define it.
Okay.
Matt, could you imagine playing Final Fantasy VII in VR? You as Cloud.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be killer.
It's going to happen. Square's going to just continually sell that game for the next 100 years.
They're going to even sell it on Dreams.
Yeah, I saw that tweet.
I saw it. For context, I sent Matt. So Dreams is going insane with the stuff they're making, but someone made the demo from this past E3. They basically made the final boss out of that in Dreams, and it actually looks really good. It looks like playable and fun.
All right, so do we want to leave it there? Do we have any other thoughts?
Well, I think we've talked round. I've talked personally round myself about 3 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it is wholly subjective and wholly personal as to what we would define as something as being retro. In terms of the initial premise of what do we think the future is for retro games, I think it's very lucrative.
I think, I think it'll probably just be more and more packages and collections, and those will take on different forms depending on how we choose to consume our games. I would like to see a Netflix style service maybe happen in the future for
no more services.
I don't know.
If I want to buy something, just let me buy the fucking thing. Don't make me sign up to a monthly subscription for everything.
But I think the one thing is it can, like you said, it can only grow from here. It honestly can, because you have the ties from the people that played it when they were kids, and people like myself that played it before, even when I was a kid, and that it's on. I mean, and the other thing that holds it has such a distinction between any other generation of hardware or games that we've ever played is that there's only a select group of them. Like, there is only going to be that small collective group that has that type of art style, that type of gameplay mechanics, that type of I don't know what else words I'm looking for, but design, other things like that I think because there's such a small nitpick group, that it makes it even more unique than any other, where as we're getting further and further along our generations of games, there are more games, and that it becomes that the market is extremely saturated, and there are sometimes games that stand out of the few, but in this case there are just so few games in a collection that stand out, that I think really people will consistently talk about and consistently want to play.
Yeah, and
that's good.
Think that here's something that it can be reimagined potentially again.
Yeah, we could. I'm surprised they haven't tried to reimagine any of these.
Well, so the thing that springs to mind is Bionic Commando.
Oh, that's true.
The remake of that was pretty horrible.
I guess the thing that's holding these games back is they have such simple premises. They have to have really interesting stories with them to be able to, or something interesting and be able to like tackle it well to be able to have an opportunity to get a remake.
Yeah. And just one final thing. Matt hasn't been promoting marriage from a religious or political standpoint with his t-shirts. If you are a single parent watching this, good for you. It's a hard job with two people, let alone just one by yourself. So that's not what he's going for.
There's one more word hidden under there that you're missing.
Yeah.
It's real men marry hairstylists.
Yeah. It was a shirt my wife got me. She used to be a hairstylist when we first met. So, yeah, just for clarification, anybody that's watching the video stream.
Yeah, it's not a political statement on behalf of Matt.
Can I hint next week?
Yeah.
Although,
is it confirmed?
Yeah, it's confirmed.
Oh, okay.
So we will have a very, very special guest on next week with us. I actually won't tell you who it is exactly, but let's just say it is
David Hasselhoff. Sorry, what?
Or Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Or Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Yeah. One of the high-profile lurkers from Sifid.net.
Yeah, and I would say without this person, us three would have never met and never would have done anything together.
Yeah.
No.
So we owe this person a lot for. Actually, I can't stand you, McWomble, but Berkough, I'm happy I met you. But he should be on with us next week, and we're really looking forward to it. We have interesting questions and interesting fun to play.
Should we play up the live streaming a little bit and maybe try to get chat involved if anybody's interested? Yeah,
absolutely. If you want to submit some talk during the conversation, we'll definitely be looking at chat during that time. So if you have any questions that go along with maybe our conversation, it might go on into the show.
Yeah,
I can't guarantee I will.
I'll look for it for you.
Yeah. I'll have it up. I'll just ignore it, when McWomble gets in my streams.
Yeah.
All right. So on that note, gentlemen, we're out.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.